Welcome back. So, do we understand globalization as a structure, or do we understand it as a flow, or is there a change in the way we perceive it? Now, in the 19th century, most sociologists and critics would argue and would use metaphors of machines and stable structures such as buildings to understand the social life, to understand how society functions. For example, Marx himself used the idea of a building. So he would come up with this idea of the base and the superstructure of how the base leads to the superstructure, and so most of these theories would understand the concepts of the social life in this manner, in much more stable terms. If the concept of the Marxian concept is not clear to you, we can have a different class altogether on that. That's for a different class altogether. Now there has been a shift actually, that kind of makes sense of what has happened, because social life has changed, society has changed in a manner, because there has been a change in the way in which we perceive networks that have come to take uh, take a place in our societies today. uh, Uri argues that contemporary social life today is far more complex and uncertain. And why is that? Because the characteristics of networks is such in our social life today that they cannot be understood in simplistic terms such as the base and the superstructure. Mann in his argument says that small events today can produce very large and unpredictable effects, because complex systems are increasingly subject to shock waves. Let's say uh, you share a photograph, or share a joke, or share a meme, or some troll comments on somebody's page, and these are very small events, but some of the repercussions of these events can be huge and unpredictable. Unpredictability is the key word here. Because the structure of networks and systems is such that the unpredictable nature makes it far more complex, and it lends itself to shock waves. Look at the example of the Paris beheading that happened recently, and you will understand that the concept of small events can result to such large and significant events in our social life today, because of the unpredictableness and the complexity of the modern social life, which is increasingly based on the idea of networks that we have. Arjun Appadurai, one of the most important cultural anthropologists of our time, actually tries to understand this kind of globalization in terms of scapes. He uses the word scapes. Scapes as we use it in the concept of landscapes, because the scapes can take in the underlying unpredictability of the flow, the structural flows, the unevenness of it, and there is also the importance of perspective, because as in landscape, so you have the plateau, you have the dips, you have the valley, you have the hills, you have the river. So landscape comes to represent that unpredictability and unevenness of the social flow today in a modern globalized world. So what are the five scapes that he uses to describe this modern society? These scapes are ethnoscape, technoscape, financescape, mediascape, and ideoscape. Now, ethnoscape, what does he mean by that? He means by the shifting terrains of people that constitute today's world. Now, this is very important. His idea of the world today belongs to the shifting terrain. So you have a constantly mobile human who is constantly on the search, on the move. So he takes in the consumerist idea of the tourist, for example, of the immigrant worker, for example, migrants, exiles, refugees. So workers who come and work in your country from abroad, let's say the migrant worker working in Dubai is far more than the host population. So The concept of ethnoscape today has to be understood in this manner, that it's a shifting terrain of people. Technoscape. Now, what does technoscape refer to? It simply refers to this network of technology and technology that we shifting technology, constantly breaching boundaries of technology that we have, from right from digital internet to transportation today. I mean, let's say in transportation today also, we are breaching new boundaries every day. Financescape. Now, this refers to this unpredictability of global capital flow today, unpredictable flows of finance, and that rebound around the world. So today, finance is not really bound by boundaries, national boundaries. You have the global equity market, stock market. You have global capital moving from this to the that. So the financescape today is a far more is a flow of global proportions. Mediascape, and it refers to the growing importance of global media today, from television to the internet. Uh, Ideascape, this is a very important idea that Arjuna Padurai formulates, and this by this he means the idea of the global flow of ideas today that are generated, and they're generated in one locality and it flows to the other, and it also has the potential to create, to become significant events. So ideas today run society majorly. Let's say today knowledge economy, for example, is a very big concept. It's a very big concept where knowledge runs the economy, where there is a separate segment in the economic sector where it's called knowledge economy. You have ideas. Let's say Tesla and Elon Musk is a perfect example of how ideas create wealth, ideas create capital. Even though his Tesla company is not profitable probably, or there are a lot of questions about the company, yet because he has this idea of creating something new, that creates profit, that creates capital. People around the world are ready to invest in his company, in his ventures, which are all creation of in ideas. Ideascape is a very, very complex but a very important understanding of the concept of globalization today. Are we a network society? Yes, we are. We cannot deny this fact. Manuel Castells, for example, in his seminal work of a network society itself, he names his book The Network Society, argues that globalization today has faced a huge shift. We have gone from an industrial paradigm to an information paradigm. Now, this, according to him, this shift from the industrial to the information is a result of the technological innovation. The technological shift has helped it happen, because the world has constantly changed the way in which it has created technology, and the way in which technology has been adopted by us. An increase, so technological shift would also result that there is an increasing role of information and communication technologies. Manuel Castells also argues that the future, the genetic technologies will also be part of this, and genetic technologies already are a very important part of this information paradigm. Uh, so Castell is arguing that networks manifest this technological and organizational superiority because of their capacity to deal with this uncertain social life that we are talking about, these complexities of the modern life that we are talking about. According to Castells, networks also have the capacity to adapt and take in this uncertainty and complexity. These shock waves can be absorbed by networks, according to Castells. Networks dissolve centers. Now, this is something very, very important. We have been talking about the center and the periphery concept. So, according to Castells, networks dissolve centers and disorganize hierarchy, making hierarchical power increasingly impossible. It abolishes the concept of hierarchy and their hierarchy and concepts such as, let's say, bureaucracy. So networks do away with these old concepts because it has the potential of decimating and demolishing the centers of power. So that's why what has happened is, with the coming up of networks, is nation states have increasingly found themselves to have been bypassed. Networks don't need power centers, they bypass power centers. And so these nation states have increasingly become weakened by these networks because they have bypassed them. In fact, so much so that some nation states feel that their sovereignty is into question today because of these emerging networks. It so this kind of emerging network which bypasses, so it not only bypasses nation states, it also bypasses other centers of power that we had in a normative society. Let's say it bypasses all these hierarchical institutions that you have in society, like the church I mentioned in here, like the school, or let's say the bureaucracy itself. So they feel overpowered, they feel in a sense weakened by this concept of the network. So it absorbs, networks have this capacity to absorb all these competing forms of social organization. Then what happens if, let's say, networks actually can absorb all of this and they bypass all of this? What does then happen? Then power is no longer there in these hierarchical institutions. Where power was normatively placed is no longer there because networks today bypass them. So political institutions find themselves increasingly disempowered. So power today then takes the form of flows, codes, and they follow the codes of this network because they have to, because networks have become the new flows of the power. So and power today then is in a highly decentralized form. So as are the nodes of network spreading around, so is power in a flowing around. So power does not necessarily now remain in the church, or when I say church, in religion I mean, so in schools, in the concept of the school, or let's say in the concept of any social organization, a club or an NGO or whatever, and political parties, let's say. So power today is then decentralized. These hierarchies of bureaucracy are no longer there. Power is decentralized along with the networks. It flows. So networks are bound. So what are networks? Networks are but nothing but binary codes of inclusion and exclusion. What does not follow the network is rejected, is abandoned. What follows the network, what is compatible with the network integrates it into it. It just takes it into the network, and what is not is ignored or thrown away. It just goes. So it loses its power. What does not follow the network today, what is not compatible with the network, is not necessary at all. So do you think network becomes then all powerful? It becomes, but there are moments of hope also here again, because when networks become power, there are also counter or alternative flows of network that can be built, or there are but that they should be built on alternative values. Or either they have alternative values, networks which have alternative values can be built, or something which is a non-network, which does not allow connections, which does not have nodes at all. So you go in a way where network itself find you unintelligible. So there are two ways in which you will encounter either a competing network which follows alternative values, or a non-network based organization, a non-network based entity structure that does not allow connections at all. So what are these? So I'll place it for you. So what are these counter to networks that we have found? So the alternative networks are, let's say, are based on the basis of alternative values. So let's say ecology today, feminism, human rights network. This can be said to be alternative value based network. While on the other hand, if we look at non-network kind of entities, this is this resistance to globalization that we have been talking about for so long. So what happens is emerging forms of fundamentalism or neo-fundamentalism or other forms of cultural communes that keep coming up, that keep cropping up, and they can be such non-networks which want to take on the network, but they don't allow. So you see all this, let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say Islamic terrorism in the Middle East that happens is an increasing form of neo fundamentalism which does not allow other networks to come and connect to it. It's resistant to the forces of globalization, and there are other such non-networks that are also there that we can refer to. Let's say the the Falun Gong movement in China, for example, is an example. The right-wing movement in several countries across the world, the Ku Klux Klan in US, for example. These are forms of neo-fundamentalism which emerge as a resistance to the network. So the concept of, next we come to the concept of other actors, other subjectivities. Now today there is an uncertainty about this concept, about this fundamental category to make sense of being and acting in the world. Whether you are or your actions, you have the agency of change. Now globalization is the system or is the logic of economic system to the point that where there is no actor. So in terms of an economic system, there is no actor, there is only behavior, there is only, as individuals correspond to the systems of opportunity or incentive. So the human individual has as much agency only to be part of that economic system. Otherwise it's not individual, it's only a behavioral. So the human agency has no actor. There is no actor here, there is only behavior. You are part of the. So globalization as an economic model doesn't allow for the individual agency. Here you can be only the subjective behavior. So individuals are part of economic systems and a system of opportunity or incentive. So action is resistance in this model. In the economic model of globalization, actions become resistance. You are not supposed to act, you are only supposed to be part of the system. So you buy and you sell, you are a consumer practice, you practice consumerist ideas. You don't literally act on your own. It's a behavioral thing that you agree to the consumeral logic of globalization. You don't make a choice on your own. That's what I mean. So individual actions is resistance to this model. Now the other side is the understanding that actor as engaged in purposive, inclusive, instrumental action, where action is shaped by understanding of interest. Now this is the opposite to what I have just said, but is something which is not acceptable in an economic system. We don't find much. In fact, if you go back to Francis Fukuyama, the end of history, you will understand that the individual action in a capitalist world is a no-no. There cannot be individual action. The last that I want to talk about is global movements. So forms of action and culture that have emerged in different types of movement, each of these are globalized. So there are globalized forms of action today, globalized forms of action culture today, globalized forms of movements today. The first of these that became popularized was an anti-globalization movement. So the anti-globalization movement against, let's say, the World Trade Organization in itself was a globalized way of protesting. So it's a very ironic, again, if I say it this way. So the first globalized movement was the anti-globalization movement against WTO. So over the 1990s, such blockades and movements have become, and actions have become very, very common in the and they have happened across all the international summits such as the World Economic Forum summits, the World Bank forums, and all of this. And as the decades progressed, such anti-globalization movement became more and more progressive and more powerful with the spreading of networks. So new forms of media and internet actually and new humanitarian movements have happened, and new direct actions also have emerged in the concept of ecological and urban action. So we have seen with the coming up of new forms of media and networks, new forms of movements happening. The ecological movement is a perfect example how there has been an action based movement, how we have been fighting climate change and all of it. So the movement contesting this neoliberal globalization also involves networks, but they are outside the power centers. So if you go back to the idea of the networks that I was talking about a few minutes back, you have to understand this all these movements which have been fighting this neoliberal globalization has had to do with networks, but away from the reach of these power centers. So that is how global movements have shaped themselves. They have used networks but away from the power centers. So this is in all the global shifts that we have seen along with the coming in globalization. And with this I come to the end in the series of the globalization classes. Thank you.